All right. All right, I'm gonna start admitting folks. So I'm gonna try and get them all to keep their camera off, but you know, people probably have them on. Okay, we're good to go?
You gonna give me a countdown?
Yeah. Okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello. Hi everyone. Welcome to a Start the Wave and BlackX Film panel, where we will be discussing all about why representation matters. Before we start, I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that we are all on various different Indigenous lands. I'm currently on the traditional territories of the peoples of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot First Nation tribes of Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations tribes of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation. The city of Calgary is also home to the historic Northwest Métis and to Métis Nations of Alberta, Region 3. By acknowledging the land that we are on, it helps us ground into the truth of our history, face up to the wrongdoings of colonialism and the continued injustice that continues to play out as a result in today's world. So just taking a moment here to thank the land, our ancestors, and all those continuing to fight for a better world. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's been such a pleasure connecting with Bianca over the past month and having conversations around this topic that means so much to me. I feel totally honored, to tell you the truth, to be continuing this conversation with such a powerful group of individuals, and I can't wait to deepen into this discussion and hear what each of you have to add to this very important discussion. So yeah, for those watching live but have managed to make it into the waiting room, into the Zoom room, apparently there was a limited capacity, welcome. You will have an opportunity to ask some questions to the panelists later on. So if anything comes to you as you're watching, just jot it down and then hopefully we'll be able to get to it later in the conversation. So thank you all for being here and happy Pride. Over to you, Bianca.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for being here. We're so excited. This is such a great group of individuals. I'm really happy that Dom gave me the opportunity to invite some folks that I've worked with personally. Before we get started, I just want to talk to y'all a little bit about BlackX. So BlackX is a 3-day online film festival started by myself and some of my filmmaker and artist friends. We're a group of predominantly queer artists. And this year the event is going to be from September 17th through the 19th. Usually we have about 5 programs consisting of short films, music videos, and 1 or 2 feature films. The event is always free. So, you know, please come, share the event, tell folks to come. I believe we don't have a limited capacity, so I think we can have as many folks as want to attend. And a little bit about how we got started. So as I'm sure most of you know, last year there were a lot of incidents in the media that were covered about police brutality. Obviously, these aren't new incidents, but I think as a Black person, I felt very affected and very compelled to want to do something about, you know, how Black folks are being portrayed. And a lot of these portrayals lead to how we're treated out in the real world. So I decided with some friends to start this film festival. We want to support and amplify Black voices. We want to pay creators, you know, Black and POC and queer creators are the most underpaid in the industry. So, you know, our festival is unique in that we actually compensate everyone who is admitted into the festival. And our ultimate mission is just to, you know, lean into our creative strengths and be a part of a movement of justice and equity and healing. So I'll tell you a little bit more about what we're doing at the end of the panel, but that's just a little bit about what I do. So thank you, Dom, for giving me the space to talk about it.
Yeah, of course. Appreciate it. So I'm going to go around and introduce these amazing humans before we get started, and perhaps you can say a little hello to everyone who's here watching. Our first panelist is Bianca, and Bianca is a 26-year-old Sacramento-based creative producer, director, and actor. Though well-versed and interested in politics, where she majored at Bard College, she has been involved with an array of film, music, and print media projects throughout her adolescence, undergraduate, and postgraduate years. Bianca received her master's degree in film at California College of the Arts in 2019. Bianca's latest acting works are My Life is a Lie and Chosen Fam. She's set to co-star in the forthcoming family holiday film, Through the Fire. And in 2020, she worked as a creative producer for Next Gen America and co-founded and co-produced the virtual Black X Film Festival that she just spoke about. Her most recent major work is a political talk show she directed and produced for young people entitled Convince Me, hosted by Amber Whittington. The show premiered on Reverie TV in November of 2020. Bianca is signed with RSA Talent Management in Los Angeles, California. Bianca, welcome. Woo-hoo! Celebrating you.
Thank you.
Awesome. So next up, we have Kyle. Kyle Casey Chu, aka Panda Dulce, is a San Francisco born and raised writer and drag queen story hour core queen whose work explores gender identities, racial justice, and desire. Her work has appeared on NPR, NBC, Vice, HuffPost, MTV, Fusion, New Now Next, them.us, at Harvard and MIT's Broad Institute, and as part of the White House's It's On Us campaign, teaching viewers how to combat anti-LGBTQ violence. Most recently, Kyle is the creator and co-writer of the all queer, trans, people of color web series Chosen Fam. Welcome, Kyle. Thank you for being here.
Thanks. Do y'all ever feel so awkward when you're being introduced? You're just like, anyways,
me.
Yeah. Thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. And next we have Samson. Let me just quickly, hey. So Samson McCormick has been one of the most in-demand voices in diversity in comedy for 2 decades. He's appeared on TV One, Viceland, Bet, Fox Soul, and Love the One You're With on Amazon Prime. He's headlined venues including the Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, the Hollywood Improv, and in 2018 made history as the first LGBTQ comedian to headline a show at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Welcome, Samson. Thank you so much for being here. Awesome. Okay. And last but not least, Leah. Hello. So Leah Robinson is a queer, transgender, butch, gender nonconforming, person of color identified actor and writer. Leah moved to Oakland from New York City, where they were active in both the theater world and film and TV. Leah is currently SAG-AFTRA and AEA and has representation in both LA, manager is Mad Catch Entertainment, and in San Francisco, MDT. Leah is also a writer of sci-fi, horror, and romance, and also a lover of cats, spending time with family, scary movies, travel, and video games.
Hey, what's happening, everybody? Good to be here. Did anyone see The Conjuring yet? I'm just saying. That's all I have to say. Silence.
No. Awesome. And I'm Dom, also known as Dominique Provost-Chalkley. I am the founder of Start the Wave, a movement and non-profit organization that funds, amplifies, and connects wave makers worldwide. Along my journey, I also had the honor and privilege of playing Miss Waverly Earp in Sci-Fi's Western, Winona Earp, where I played a beautiful bisexual woman. And through playing that character, it helped me enormously in my own journey into my queerness, which continues to be the most interesting and vibrant evolution of self. Yeah, I'm just deeply grateful to be living this in this lifetime. So yeah, welcome, hooray, representation matters. Happy freaking Pride, everybody. It's so good to have you all here. So the first question I have is for everybody, all of you here, and I'd love to know, when was the first time you saw someone that looked like you on screen? Kick off with Bianca. Yeah, go for it.
Cool. So I actually thought about this question a lot as I was over preparing. And I think it's a very complicated question as a queer Black woman, because I was raised in, predominantly white suburbs for most of my adolescence. So a lot of the first portrayals of other Black women I saw on screen were riddled with racism and stereotypes that I couldn't relate to. So this kind of estranged me further from my Black identity. And because I lived in this predominantly white space, I was usually the only Black person in the classroom. It caused me to have an identity crisis. And when I realized I wasn't straight, it added another layer of confusion and self-loathing on top of that. So there were a few, queer characters in shows like Degrassi and South of Nowhere. I'm sure some of you know of those shows. And while they did help me kind of come into my queer identity and help me feel more assured and normal in myself, like I didn't quite fully relate to those characters because there were still a lot of cultural differences. So it wasn't until recently probably that I actually have seen nuanced representation of a queer Black woman on screen. And there are a few examples of it, right? You have like Insecure, you have 20s. I think, I haven't watched it, but Black Lightning, I heard there are a Black queer woman on that show. So, they exist now, but I think it's kind of new. And whether those representations are completely genuine, completely accurate portrayals, that's questionable. So, I think it was actually probably more of like independent creators, YouTubers like Amber's Closet that helped me come into myself more when I was a teen. Seeing Black lesbian being out and proud and confident really helped me. So it's really quite awesome because I ended up collaborating with Amber last year and with Samson on a project that I directed and produced. So it kind of came full circle. So, the importance of indie media is, so crucial in that, it's really the folks that haven't been able to make it into these boardrooms that have these great ideas for representation and how to do it well and accurately and without dangerous stereotypes. So short answer, it wasn't until recently. And I think we still have ways to go.
Thanks, Bianca, I really appreciate that. How about you, Kyle?
Thanks for that, Bianca. I thought about this question a lot too. And I feel like when we're asked, like, when is the first time you saw yourself represented on screen, there's this assumption that, like, It's like when you saw yourself in that portrayal, you know what I mean? Like you could relate to that character, you could relate to the decisions being made. What they're doing is humane and like multidimensional. Like, and if I were to answer that question, I would say I didn't see myself represented at all, because if anything, we were not really represented as Asian Americans on screen in general. One, we were just conspicuously absent. And then when we were on screen, it was like peppered in the background, or maybe different casualties in a war film, or someone talking in broken English and like kind of providing an obstacle for the main character who is dimensionalized. And so in that sense, like it was hard for me to identify with anybody. But if I were to say the first time I saw an Asian person on screen, it was Data from Goonies. Have you all seen Goonies? Yeah. I don't know. I'm just like millennialing myself, but like Goonies, obviously like a dope movie, right? But like Data's so awkward. Like, oh my God. Like the whole point of Data was to like have inventions and to like kind of bark in broken English, and like, I don't know, like he was just like tactless and kind of socially inept. And like when I was playing like in groups with kids, like I would aspire to that. And like I was like, that's who I should be, right? And so I would always want to be the baby. I would always want to be taken care of. I would never want to take center stage. And so I was kind of complacent with that relegation and like the stage of like children's playground stuff. But it wasn't until Power Rangers when Trini came on, like the Yellow Ranger, and I wanted to be the Red Ranger because he's the main character. He gets to fight all the bad guys in like a really like central way, right? And I came to school on Halloween as the Red Ranger, and I remember this kid telling me, "You can't be the Red Ranger." And I was like, "Why not?" And he's like, "Because you have to be the Yellow Ranger. That's who you are." And so it's in this way that like I had this very jarring identity crisis in the same way that Bianca talks about, where it's like I was like, not only was I not able to be who I wanted to be, who I knew I could be, who I knew I deserved, but because of the lack of representation of Asian heroes, of humane Asian representation, like it limited everyone else's imagination of who I could be. It limited everyone else's imagination of what was possible for someone who looked like me. And so I was confused for a really long time. And like you, like I'm fourth generation Chinese American, like, so I was consuming the same media y'all were. Like I watched Three Ninjas, another like deep cut. I don't know if y'all know that, but it's like literally about like three suburban white boys who like get trained in martial arts by like an Asian grandpa figure. And like they ate rice. So like I could relate to that. And then like, but they were also cool and like skateboarded. So I could relate to that. But I think it wasn't until like I studied about race later that I realized how violently like cut out of the picture we were, and how all of these representations of Asian Americans as backwards, as foreign, as like calculator wielding math nerds, like they all stem from politics, and it stems from like war propaganda, and it has an agenda. Like I'm like on one, I'm going on one. I'm sorry, Dom, but like,
Yeah.
like even this year, like with the Stop Asian Hate stuff, like, and like Trump mobilizing this like anti-Asian rhetoric and being like the China virus, like it has political connotations on like an international stage, right? It's like because China's becoming a superpower that we want to antagonize Asians at home. And so like, I just think it's so unfortunate that we Asian Americans become casualties in this culture war when obviously we're capable of so much more. And so it's because of that that I create films. It's because of that that I made something like Chosen Fam, which centers on queer and trans people of color. And it's necessary that these voices are amplified, I think.
Where will we be able to watch Chosen Fam? I'm so
That's-
excited. I had a look at your website and it just looks so exciting.
Oh my gosh, thank you. So we are pending a distribution deal, but we just got funding for 4 more episodes. So it's not out yet, but it will be soon. And yeah, so pending is the answer. But thanks for asking.
Yeah, of course. And Samson, how about you?
Oh my God, this panel is awesome. Y'all have already kicked it off, showing off. Y'all need to stop it right now. I'm happy we're having this conversation, and to jump right in, you know, it was very fragmented looking for myself growing up, because I'm from Washington, D.C., which is very political. You know, I grew up during the Reagan era, during the war on drugs, during the AIDS epidemic. And so I was right there in the middle of it. On one hand, it was very empowering being able to see shows like In Living Color and the Arsenio Hall show and Oprah, which was Black empowerment. But then you would also see these conversations with queer people where we were victims or we were, perverts or bad people, and so that created, like Bianca said, for me, identity crisis. It's this part of me is awesome, but this part of me I have to hide. And so it wasn't until around 2006 or 2005 this show came out called Noah's Ark. I don't know how many of y'all remember Noah's Ark, but it was 4 Black gay men in Los Angeles, and all the gay boys that I hung out with in DC lost our minds because gay Black men were on television kissing, having relationship problems. They were making money. They lived in nice condos, and it totally opened up the doors in our minds for the possibilities that we could have as Black gay men. And from there, I've continued to look for more images like myself, like, Kyle, like Bianca, other queer people of color. But I think, it goes without saying, we still got a long way to go. And so, that's why we're here. And I'm looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you. Well said. Leah, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who shared up to now. Thank you for, I've resonated with so much of what you're saying. It's a great opportunity and privilege to be here. So thank you for having me, and thanks for everyone who's listening and holding this space with us this evening. To answer that question, I also didn't see myself, period. As a little Black queer kid growing up in Kentucky, growing up Jewish in Kentucky at a certain place, and that's a whole other panel discussion. But I did not see myself on screen. And in order to survive that time, I had to have the most active imagination. So instead of seeing myself there, I just replaced the people on television with myself. And I would grab those scenes, and later on I would try to dream about them, or I would fantasize about that life. And it was almost like I had this whole other life that was happening, whether it was Miami Vice, Ricardo Tubbs, or the movie Splash, or Star Wars. When Star Wars came out, that was something that I could really watch and see, like replace certain characters with myself. So that's how I was able to see myself in those ways. Being a Black kid, there wasn't a whole lot, unless it was a Miami Vice or something like that, but there wasn't a whole lot on the big screen for me to navigate until The Last Dragon came out when I was a teenager. And that was like one of my favorite movies of all time. That's where I really finally saw myself. Had the biggest crush on Vanity when she was on that movie, and was just like, it was mind blowing. And that helped me a lot, because not seeing myself was hard. It was hard, and it was harmful, growing up in Kentucky and looking for that outlet, that creativity, that one place where I might be able to understand and know that I'm okay, it's normal, I'm supposed to be here. So I didn't really see myself. I had to put myself into those things. And that also, I think the through line, a couple of y'all have talked about it, was kind of like, it just added to the little identity crisis that I was already having, right? So that's why I think it's really, really important that these conversations are happening, and that we're all sitting here having this conversation, and that folks are in this space with us, and we're holding this container and we're having this conversation. So it's cyclical, right? It just, for me, it's coming full circle for this moment to be able to really kind of talk about that and the value.
Thank you. Well said. So we've kind of already started to touch on it, but if I was to ask you, like, what does representation, or why does representation matter to you personally? And what has it meant to see yourself represented on screen? Is there anything else you'd like to add that maybe we haven't touched on in those initial answers? Bianca, if you want to kick us off.
I think it was semi-touched on, but I think, like, to answer your question of like what representation, why it matters, or what it means, for me, it's representation is like a sense of relatability, right? We talked about relatability and feeling, being able to understand not just the identity of somebody on screen, but like their decision-making process, right? Like the backstory, what informs their decisions moving forward. You know, privilege has a huge impact on the way that we navigate the world. So someone who was born with certain privileges would never be able to understand the decision-making process or the thought process behind why a Black person might move to the other side of the road or the other side of the street when approaching, you know, a frail old white woman. You know, you don't have that backstory, you don't have that double consciousness. So it's hard, you rarely see that type of nuance shown on screen. So for me, representation means a sense of comfort, a sense of being like, wow, yeah, that, how do they know that? How do they know I think like that too? How do they know I have to do that? You know, not having to deconstruct a character's backstory fully because you just understand them to their core. And, you know, to see more Black queer folks on TV, I think it's made it so I'm less afraid to be outwardly myself. You know, it's made it so I'm able to hold my partner's hand when we go out in public and be confident in that relationship and not afraid and not wanting to shield who I am. Being Black and proud and wearing a Black Lives Matter shirt and, you know, just being bold, that's been new for me because of a new sense of representation, not just in TV and film, but media in general. I think actually, you know, a lot of independent creators have started this movement, and Hollywood is trying to catch up, but in a way that is still beneficial to them. And what's beneficial to them is still holding on to some of these stereotypes. So right now, we're not seeing the full picture. I think we're seeing parts of representation, but to say that there's complete representation in Hollywood, you know, is a fallacy.
Absolutely. Kyle, is there anything that you'd like to add to why representation matters to you?
I mean, snaps to everything Bianca said, and has been said in general by this panel. I think I have so many feelings about this that it's kind of like putting an ocean through a straw, but let me tell you a story. So after I graduated college, I was a barista, and I met this guy, John, who was also coming from Kentucky, actually. And being like really clumsy, I like messed up the ice machine. And so there's ice everywhere and it was all over the floor because I'm a mess. And he was just like, oh, it's okay. You're probably used to being wet. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, because didn't you swim here? Like, and it was like an immigrant joke, right? Yeah, I know. And it was 2010. That's not an excuse, but it's like, these kinds of jokes, I feel like were way more pervasive and less like politically polarizing than they are now, which isn't to say it's like world's better now, but I talked to him about it and I talked to management about it and I was just like, that's fucked up. Like, and when he apologized to me, he was like, I'm sorry, like, you're the first Asian guy I met. And I didn't know that it would have this impact and like, whatever, he was profusely apologizing. But I think the point is like, he was coming from a context where he had never met an Asian person before. He was coming from a context where the only interaction that he had had with Asian people was through media. And what media told him is that we are one-dimensional immigrants, perpetually foreign, that we are passive, that we are plot devices and not fully fleshed out characters, that we can be easily toppled over, that he can say something like that and get away with it, and that there will not be a consequence. There will not be an emotional potency felt on the other side. And so I think what fundamentally in that is just a certain kind of empathy that I feel like is lacking when it comes to people of color, when it comes to queer people, right? Like, had he been exposed to other forms of media, had he seen Asian people in different kinds of roles, speaking English, not broken, actually fleshed out characters, handling familial problems that he can relate to, I feel like this would have gone completely differently. I feel like he would have had a kind of compassion that just was not present in our first interaction. Roger Ebert, I think, I don't know. said something about film where he's like, film is the ultimate empathy machine in all of the arts, because for an hour, for 2 hours, it allows you to step into someone else's shoes, someone else's experience, race, religion, right? And that is so true. Leah and Bianca know that I love this quote because I bring it up in every Chosen Fam thing, but like Junot Diaz, I know he's revealed himself to be a sketchy person, but he said, what did he say? He was like, you know, the thing about vampires, what they say about vampires, right, is that like they don't see them, they don't have a reflection in the mirror. And there's this idea that if this monster looks in the mirror, that's what makes them a monster, is that reflection. But I don't think that's it. I think what it is if you want to turn someone into a monster, you deprive them of any cultural reflection of themselves. And I think that is like the bitter truth that we're all getting to here with this identity crisis, with relating to whiteness, with relating to straightness, and forcing yourself to contort all the uniqueness of yourself into that box that you know just doesn't fit, that isn't right, that doesn't get to the heart of your lived experience. Like that is what we're getting at when we talk about representation mattering. I don't know what else to say.
That was like mic drop moment. So I feel like it's, thank you for sharing. Yeah. Samson, anything you'd like to add, love?
I agree with everything that has been said. And I think that we should agree representation matters, because history has shown us that the last thing we need anywhere is white people telling any more stories, okay? You know, you look at a lot of these stories that get told about people of color and they're all wrong. You know, even now, you see a lot of stories that get written about Black people, and you look at the writer's credits, and a lot of times, like, you look at the names and you're like, ain't no Black people on there, okay? And you go and you look up and there are no Black people. So that's one reason. And then secondly, as a gay Black man growing up, it's funny because I related to people that I saw on Boys in the Hood and things like that, but I also related to Grace Jones and Patti LaBelle and Joan Rivers and Dolly Parton and all these strong women, but there was nothing in the middle. There were also no stories, you know, like Kyle said, that allowed the viewer to step into the shoes of a Black gay person of something other than, no, and even then, well, Will Smith did 6 Degrees of Separation, but even then, I don't think a lot of people in the Black community had the knowledge or even the emotional intelligence to be able to slow down and look at that character outside of the lens that they have placed them in. And so again, it goes back to the statement that I made earlier about we were always made to look like victims or frauds or perpetrators or perverts or scam artists, these horrible people. And so, of course, what does that make other people think about you? How does that make you look at yourself? And so, you know, that was the hardest thing. You know, I think the most powerful, I'm running off 2 hours of sleep, so I'm having some brain farts, so bear with me. We're gonna get to the destination. The most powerful thing that can come of representation is allowing folks, and I'm talking about Black people right now, because the way my community sees Black queer people is important to me, and everybody else is secondary. But the way Black people relate to things, I would like to see more stories that make Black people scream at the television and the movie screens, that have Black queer people in the lead, because if you make Black people scream at a screen, you got them. So I would like to see some stories where a Black queer person is in the lead, and it's a story that is compelling, that draws them in and makes you root for them, because that's when the audience is able to say, I relate to that. And that's what you want.
Beautiful. Leah.
I don't even know how to follow some of this knowledge y'all cats are dropping right now. I wouldn't add it. I agree with everything. I've snaps to everything that everyone has said. I think that representation is also about visibility. It's about compassion. right? And sometimes it's about education and awareness, right? So I think it's really important for folks to experience multiple narratives, right? Other people's stories, other people's experiences, other people's realities, right? Because I may not understand what it means to walk in someone else's shoes, right? But if I make a connection with that person and if I'm curious and I'm open and raise my awareness about that scenario, then there may be something I can relate to in a way that's going to increase my empathy, my compassion, which we could all use a little bit more of that as we walk through the world, right? And the last piece around that, it's socially important, right? For that education and awareness piece. And don't get me wrong, I know that in this work that we do around education and awareness, it's not everyone's job to educate others, right? We get into this place of like, whose responsibility is it? Yes, I can put work out there that tells a story, and I hope that someone watches it, sees it, learns something, piques their awareness about something in a way that they may get a little curious, dig a little deeper, like around trans rights and what the trans experience is. And maybe something can relate to their own life and they can have some compassion and empathy, make a connection, a relation to that, right? Or as an actor, really being out there and having roles that push the conversation forward. Like, what does it mean to be a Black reverend in a Black church talking about homosexuality, trans identity, all the phobias that happen within that realm, right? So that education and that social reflection can happen in Black and brown communities, straight, trans, queer community, all these different communities, that this is a vehicle to tell a story, to put as many stories out there so that we can raise our awareness and we can learn something new about someone else's life and maybe get a little bit curious and do our own research and then have some compassion and awareness about it. So I think that visibility is a huge part, and education and awareness. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Is it okay if I respond to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it. Go for
I know
it.
we have like a structure, but like I just really like what Leah said. Well,
Yeah,
okay, I have two things. One is where's Leah and like the other panelists are talking about how, like we need these representations and we need a diversity of representation so we know that our potential and who we can be is limitless, right? As limitless as anybody. But it's also like, it's not just about humanizing people of color, humanizing LGBTQ people. It's about humanizing the viewer, because it's like, what do you do when you look at a Black person and you say they're just a criminal because that's all we've seen? Like, what does that do to your humanity? Like, you're offering like a myopic view of the world and you're projecting that onto somebody else unfairly. And that profoundly affects their psyche. It profoundly affects how they move through the world. And so it's also about us, right? I totally had another thought, but then I got emotional. That's all. Okay, that's it for now.
Awesome. Yesterday I participated in an event called Porch Pride, and it was a way to celebrate Pride on your porch in this COVID world, and everybody was kind of in their various places, and we came together, and I had the opportunity to speak to like over 100 of the Wynonna Earp fans, and I haven't connected with them in quite a while. And it was like the perfect like prep in many ways for this panel to remind myself of the importance of representation, because like probably over 90% of the people that I spoke to thanked me for the representation, and that's like enormous. That was the common theme, and it has been since the very beginning of the Wynonna Earp journey, has been all around the importance of the representation, and how had these people not seen Waverly Earp on screen, they may not have got to the place that they are within themselves and their own life and being able to live authentically. And I was really, because I haven't seen some of these people in a while, but I have met them multiple times, just seeing the transformation that they have been on, like alongside the journey of the show and how far everyone's come. It, for me yesterday, it just really showed the magic of the medicine of representation and how it literally can change people's lives and help themselves see more of themselves reflected and therefore able to embody it. Because as you said, Kyle, at the beginning of the panel, it shows what's possible, and them seeing, oh, hang on a second, I can be with a woman and have a happy ending and it be celebrated, and it's huge. It's huge, and it literally changes lives. And having those conversations as they just really reminded me of that. I just wanted to share before we go on to our next question, which is, how do you think, I mean, we're touching on all of these questions, but how do you think representation in the media affects how people like you are perceived and interacted with in real life? Has it been hurtful, harmful, or helpful? And yeah, Bianca, go for it.
So short answer, all of the above. But I will say it's definitely been hurtful and harmful over everything. If you've seen the documentary Disclosure, you've seen how historically the portrayal, sorry, I can't talk today, of trans and gender non-conforming folks have been painted in the most negative light. It's not until recently we have examples, or more authentic examples of trans experiences, where they aren't the villain of the story or the victim, where they're able to just be people, multidimensional beings. That said, representation is getting better, but we won't be there fully until transphobia and queerphobia is eradicated, right? Because life imitates art and art imitates life, and they're not mutually exclusive. So, the same goes for gay and bisexual characters. Growing up, for me, it was normal to see gay people being left out of the storylines, being sidelined, being the rejected love interest, being the comedic relief with self-deprecating humor, or being killed off, right? Like, I think, before the age of like 18, I saw more gay characters on screen being killed off than not. And that's sad. I remember being so surprised when I watched like maybe 2 or 3 or 4 consecutive shows where the gay characters were not killed off. And I was like, whoa. Like, I was bracing myself for something bad to happen, and no child should have to watch a show and be afraid that someone that they relate to or relate to more than anybody else is has the death sentence, right? Like, while I question the authenticity of the queer experience right now in mainstream media and Hollywood, I think it's important to note that at least we do have storylines, and that's a start. There's a pathway, and I am optimistic, but there is a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. Kyle.
I would also say that representation profoundly affects every aspect of my life because, and I'm sure like I'm not the only one who feels this way, like there's no instance in which you're interacting with me where you're not aware of my Asianness, where you're not aware of my queerness because I'm flaming. And like, I feel like because of that, like the most often the way that I'm interacted with is like, there's this concept in like Asian American studies stuff where it's like, we talk about ourselves as ghosts sometimes because there's this conception that we're not treated with the same level of humanity as others because we're passive and dismissible and like kind of like robotic gears in this capitalist system that provide labor. And that is like how Asian Americans came to the US in the first place, is through labor, right? And so like, it comes for me, especially within the queer community, in the form of dismissal. Like a lot of times it's not how people are looking at me, it's how people aren't looking at me. And I think one of the most emotionally poignant aspects of that is that it's hard to prove. It's hard to say like, that guy rolled his eyes at me, that guy didn't respond to me, that guy didn't hold the door open for me because of my race, right? There's so many confounding variables in that, and it's hard to just point to that one microaggression and say that's because of this. But there's some things that you just know to be true. There's some things that you just know in your body, and you're just like, I'm kind of sick of like gaslighting my own experience because it makes other people uncomfortable. And like, I know why I'm being treated this way. And a lot of the time when I talk about it, I feel like I get a lot of resistance because people are very uncomfortable with that truth, right? They're very uncomfortable with the fact that we live in a world where people are treated inequitably and that it's happening under their own watch, that they themselves could be perpetuating that very same thing. And so I think one of the hardest things for me is like, now as like a 30-something-year-old, like my brain is fully formed, like I understand these are just ideas. These are not my ideas. It wasn't my idea to like make myself into a passive person, into a formed person, into X, Y, Z negative things, right? But when you're growing up and when your brain is forming and you're just gaining your understanding of yourself and the world, like you soak that up like a sponge. And it's like when you walk onto a set or when you have a strong opinion and people are like, oh, I'm really surprised that you have that opinion. I'm shocked that you're this way. It's like, why are you shocked that I am myself? And a lot of times it just feels like there's a shadow version of you, which is like stereotypes and like this multitude of media that like speaks that truth, right? And I just feel like as a person of color, as a queer person, you're always in conversation with that. You're never just yourself. You're always trying to dispel some preconceived notion about this person, right? That has nothing to do with you. Like, that I'm an opinionated person, that I'm a quirky person, that I'm a funny person, that I have all of these dimensions that this just flattens always. And so I can't express the level of frustration that comes with that. And that comes with being a part of an industry that continues to perpetuate that. But at the same time, like, I am so grateful for people like Dom and creators like Samson who are creating media that like shows all of the corners, like shines a light on all these experiences that we have yet to see and so desperately need to, because this is who we are, you know?
Absolutely. Yep. Samson, over to you.
Hi, y'all. So I want to piggyback off of what I said earlier when I was speaking about white people controlling the narratives about queer people of color, everybody who they are not in these writers' rooms. I was about to say writers' rooms, no pun intended. No, but I'm a very honest and blunt person. So if anybody is listening and you are uncomfortable, please, know this is from the heart. The reason why I have a problem with more people who live those experiences not being present in the room to help create, and I think it's a beautiful thing for us to come together from the different walks of life, but I think when you are telling stories about Black people, when you're telling stories about queer people, we need to be in there because we live those experiences and we tell them way more honestly. A lot of the stories that are created in bias. And if you don't believe me, you can look at the news and see how when a Black person is killed by the police, not only are they killed, and not only is their family left without an uncle or a son or a mother or a father, but that person is killed and they are put on trial for their own murders. At that point, you are stripping someone of their humanity. And we see that in these stories over and over again. There may be a story written about a Black drug dealer. Sure, there are Black drug dealers. I know quite a few. but they don't tell the other part of the story about this person being so desperate to support their children because they aren't able to get a job, or because their mother is working 3 jobs and still not able to make ends meet, that they went out and got involved in selling drugs. And it wasn't for any violent reasons. It was they were so desperate to make a living that that was the last option. You know, they don't show that part that makes you empathize with their humanity, and that's what bothers me. Or they might create a story where a pastor is, he's homophobic, but he's sleeping with men, and then they'll say, oh well, he got HIV, and now he's again a criminal for his circumstances. And so that's the biggest issue is the lack of compassion. And I'm not a person who necessarily is upset about racism or any of those things. Like, I'm so at peace with myself, and I know the type of energy that I seek to pour into the world, that I cannot bring anger. Now I'm going to call it out. I'm going to be honest so that we can laugh at it and deal with it, because it exists. And one of the most beautiful things that I've been able to do is I've been doing comedy for the past 20 years as a Black queer comedian. And I don't just get to perform in LA and New York City. I go to Iowa, I go to Kentucky, I go to Montana, places where there are plenty of other Black gay people. And I'm able to have conversations with people who don't share the experience. But the most beautiful thing is, by the time they leave that theater and we have laughed together, they understand that we're more alike than we are different. And I don't think we strive hard enough to do that in media, and we need to.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Leah, over to you, sweet.
So I think we've come a long way. I mean, I remember, as an actor, seeing calls for like man dressed as woman killed in the alleyway for like one of the New York City, like dun 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 dun, that show that a lot of us are on that show. Yes, thank you. And now we've come a little bit further where there's actually, the language is actually being used, right? There are calls for like trans identified folks. I really love what was said earlier around this idea of, like this representation, but the representation gets killed in the first 5 minutes, right? Or we have this, like, this person's really telling their story narrative and they get killed. And that does send the message of, oh shit, I'm going to get killed. There's this gloom and doom kind of like fear. It reiterates that fear, it reaffirms that fear, right? For viewers or for folks who are living that experience. But I want to say specifically, as a trans actor, I have to be really careful about roles, right? I have to go a little bit deeper. I see, like, it's so exciting, first of all, to be a trans actor in this industry and actually see calls for trans actors, right? First of all, that's like, let's go, right? But then there's another step. So there's a way that I have to like dig a little bit deeper and see what is this project? Is it about is it an empowerment story, or is it some sort of someone else's stereotype or idea of what a trans person is that's going to be put on the screen and then murdered off, or some sort of demonization, right? So it's like, we have to be really, really careful. We have to be really selective. There is a great benefit to this like inclusivity that seems to be happening more, like, but what is it actually, what's the intention, right? What is the intention behind this role? Do the folks who are doing this project really understand what the difference is between, being a trans woman and being a drag queen? You know what I'm saying? I've had so many experiences where it's like, well, Leah, we'll just get a drag queen. And I'm like, that's not the same thing. What is it that you want? What are you looking for? What's the story you're telling? And do I want to be even having this conversation right now? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's really tricky. And it's actually been helpful for me as a writer as well. I was recently working on this piece. I'm working on this piece about this couple, this Black queer couple. One person is trans identified and transitioning, trans masculine, making the transition. And their partner is a Black femme identified woman. And I started telling the story and I realized I'm not a Black femme woman. So how do I tell her story? Do I make some sort of assumptions about how she would navigate this situation? Sure, I can pull from my own personal experience and relationships and conversations I've had with past partners about transitioning and what that would mean for her, and what that would mean for us as a couple. But do I really understand the experience of a Black woman, a Black queer femme woman? No. And how do I make sure I'm being authentic? That's my responsibility to make sure I'm not telling a story that's not authentic. And how I choose to do that is then around more intentionality of talking to folks, making sure folks aren't feeling like they have to educate Leah about this or feeling like they're a part of this conversation, et cetera, et cetera. But I was just kind of thinking with this question about, yeah, what does it mean to finally have these characters in the world? And are we being intentional about how we're putting these characters into the world and what we're auditioning for and what we're taking or not taking, you know? So that was a kind of a long answer to that, but that's what was going on for me, thinking about this particular question.
I really appreciate that. And I'm curious, how often when you're, firstly, two follow-up questions, Leah, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah.
Speaking to them, like, how often do you have to turn things down because they don't feel aligned?
Yeah.
And how do you have those conversations? Is it you personally, or is it like, do you ask your agent to talk about it, or do you just go straight to the creators? How do you make that call, you know, whether it makes sense for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a living, I do work around implicit bias, explicit bias, microaggressions, stereotypes. So I do this all the time. I always have these conversations around, you know, impact, around discrimination, around inclusion and diversity. So it's like I do have the tools to do that, right? So when it kind of happens, I'm always kind of aware of what's happening, and the awareness is peaked. So I'm asking questions, but I've had to turn down a couple of roles for that reason, you know, and my agents are really great. You know, the key for me is having my agent and my manager work closely together. And in the beginning, it took a conversation between us, what I want and what I don't want, what I'll do and what I won't do, right? Regardless of if it's completely dry and I haven't had an audition in a month, what will I do and what will I not do, right? So I have those two who are battling for me. And they may come to me and say, Leah, there's this role. They're looking for a trans person. It doesn't say trans man or trans woman. They're looking for a trans person. Do you want me to submit you? Right? And you can interpret that as you want to interpret it. And my question is like, well, what's this project? Who are these people? And what do you think? Like, can you ask some more questions? And they'll do that. Something interesting that's been happening lately, that's happened a few times in the past month or so, is this call for trans women, but then asking me if I want to play a trans woman. Okay. And that's been like a direct like outreach from like casting folks, not through my manager and agent. And, you know, a couple of times, you know, because I identify as trans, I identify as two-spirit. You know, I was raised by my grandmother in Kentucky. I have both male, and I feel like I have both male and female in my body. Right now, I am masculine. That's who I am. You know, that's as I'm getting older, that is, they and them, he and him over she and her any day, right? I had to really think about, and these were some big projects, right? I had to really think about what was their intention, and am I willing to do this? Am I willing to do that? And the answer, I dug a little deeper with one, you know, I was able to communicate directly with this person. And what she was looking for was problematic in a couple of ways. You know, it was like the woman on Good Times. And I was just like, this is problematic in so many ways. And what happened with me was I had to just really be like, first of all, no, I'm not going to do that because that's not who I am. That's not how I identify. But more importantly, there are trans women out here who need that opportunity. And I'm a big trans activist. What am I going to look like doing a trans role that a trans woman, you know, I'm sure I could put some sort of spin on it and make it fluid and make it, if that's what they're looking for. But if they're looking for a trans woman, go find one of these amazing trans women. I can give you a couple of names and cast them, because this role is for them. This role is not for me. And it took me a minute to get like, that's the integrity. I'm getting warm because it's really emotional for me, but that's the integrity that's super important for me with these roles. It's hard to not get a role and to not see yourself being asked for in this world, in this industry. But when they come along, you still have to have some sort of pause and intention and integrity about it. So I was able to be like, absolutely not. And this is what y'all should do with this role. There are a lot of trans women who would be amazing for this role. And here are a couple of names, you know, unless it's problematic. And then I'm just saying, thank you, but no, you know.
And going off that, and maybe if anybody else has had a similar experience, they could also speak to it. When you're in a situation where it is problematic, and so you decide to turn a role down because of that reason, are you communicating that to the creators so that they are aware? Because I think like I've been in situations where I've auditioned for something and it just doesn't feel in integrity at all for what I want to do. I haven't communicated that with them, and somebody else is going to come in and play the role. You know, the part is still going to be created, and that's still going to be problematic for the viewers that are watching it. It's still out there. So I wonder if there's a way of communicating that to the creators in a way that is respectful, but is really, you know, staying in integrity, as you're saying.
I have something to say, but I'll let someone else jump in first if anyone else wants.
Has anyone been in that?
I'll say, you know, that's on one hand, and it's really good to hear people talk about integrity. Oh my God, we got some gold nuggets on here. Oh my God, integrity. Oh my Lord. On the other hand, a lot of times, you might not get a call at all because there's usually not much work for us. And so, you know, we're tasked with creating those stories, and then a lot of times struggling to get the funding to make the story and bring it to screen, and then B, get an audience to support it enough so that we can get some traction behind it to be able to create more stories. So there's this on one side, you know, the work is so scarce for many folks that and it's really huge to put integrity in front of that. That is kind of like you kind of have to fit yourself into that box. Or on the other side, kind of struggle not having work and figuring out how to work around that.
And also, sorry, just in context of this conversation, I think it's also important to understand, like Samson said, how limited certain roles are for certain groups of people. I have not seen many casting calls for trans women or Black trans women specifically, because as an actor, you see casting calls and you'll see they list every other race, including ethnically ambiguous, except for Black, right? So I can imagine it's the same thing for trans women, but it's even more scarce. So, you know, while I think it's ideal to be selective with certain roles, I think there's a lot of people out there that don't really have the opportunity to, you know, if they make a living off their acting, or if that is a huge part of their supplemental income, I can't really fault them for hustling, you know what I mean? Because we're all, but I think if you have that privilege and you're exercising that integrity, because you have the privilege of exercising it, that's wonderful. And I commend you for doing that, Leah, because that's really important.
Yeah, thank you. And don't get me wrong, I'm not out here like, no, no, you know, I got it going on, so no. You know, it took me a long time to get to a point where, and it was hard because you're right. I probably see something that's a fit for me, not very often, to be really honest, you know, and when it comes across, it's like a blue moon when it comes across. But I have come to a place, it's been such a challenge to walk into rooms and try to get someone to see me and try to find something for me, you know, that would fit me. It's been so hard that I've had to figure it out and be like, this is how I have to do it, you know, and you're right, it is a privilege. It is a privileged role, right? I do have a manager and an agent who can get me in those spaces. I'm SAG-AFTRA, I can get into those spaces. May take a little bit longer, but I have privilege there. So I can say, no, actually, I won't take that role because that should be for a trans woman. And here's how to find some of those actors, right? And Dom, to your question around having those conversations, it depends. You know, it depends if I'm in a space to educate somebody or not about the shit, to be honest with you. But most of the time I am. And if it's someone that I've had a couple of talks with and we're going back and forth, I may be able to say, look, listen, this is not a good role for me and this is why. Now, if you're looking for this, this, and this, these are the folks you need to be talking to. But if you're looking for that, that, and that, it's kind of problematic that you would make a call for this, right? There are some folks who it's so far out there that it would be self-harm for me to try to like have that conversation with them, if that makes any sense. And I've had that experience where I was just like, that's not what I am. But don't you do both? You're both, right? I mean, aren't you like a transvestite? This is, first of all, do a little more research before you're making something about someone's life that you have no idea about. So, and that was some guy from like, he was I think he was in their Ukraine or something, and he was trying to work on this project and bring it to San Francisco. And somehow he got my picture off of backstage, I think, and was like trying to like recruit me for this role. And then it became, why don't you consult me? And it was just too much. Didn't feel right, you know, so I stepped away from that. So sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Good for you.
Yeah.
So in my experience with Wynonna Earp, it came at a time, Wynonna Earp came at a time when there had been a string of queer characters killed off in TV shows, one after the next, after the next, after the next. And it was only through living the experience and being in Wynonna Earp and talking to the fans that I really learned about the effects of that and how destructive that is for people that are watching, and what that speaks to and what that tells them. And yeah, I just remember like countless conversations about people that were genuinely scared to attach themselves to the characters that we were portraying. It was like they wanted so much to love these characters, but they were protecting themselves. And actually they were like, when they would approach us, there would be this level of like, they'd almost have to say it like, yeah, but is this going to go in the same direction? Like, how can we trust you? And I remember feeling, right?
I was just like, that's so deep that like we can't even attach ourselves to people there's like a reticence to, because we're like, how long are you going to be with us?
Yeah, exactly. And it was like totally heartbreaking to see. And it was really, you know, hats off to Emily in that she just spoke to it. Emily's the showrunner of Wynonna Earp, and she just kept saying over and over again, like reassuring them that like we were going to do it differently, and we assure you that the story is going to be done well, and that you aren't going to have the same fate that you've seen over this past year. But it was huge. It was really like a pivotal moment for the queer community, especially the sci-fi queer community that we're watching. And so I wondered if anybody wanted to speak to queer baiting and the killing off of queer characters in the media.
I guess I'll start. I know I touched on it a little bit in a prior question, and I know it happens less now because I think there's been a little bit more conversations about that sort of thing and how it affects the audiences, but it does still happen, and I think like some showrunners like get it. They're like in their own interpersonal lives and relationships, they are compassionate people. They understand the context of queer characters being killed off or sidelined, and they stand up for it, like your showrunner Emily. I think, I think why I was thinking about it earlier, and Wynonna Earp is like the perfect example of like that not happening for one of like the first times. Like when I was watching, I was actually able to immerse myself in the relationship of Waverly and Nicole, because I felt confident that they would be okay. But I remember so many times in the past watching, like I said, when I was a teen watching shows, like I just expected something bad to happen. Like I was literally tensed up expecting something bad to happen to one of my favorite characters. I think like at the end of the day, some executives see queer people as disposable, right? Like they're just the vessel to a bigger, better storyline for the cishet protagonist, right? I think it's really, and this is super irresponsible, and I think, like, you know, it's hard to say what the solution is to this, right? Like I think only time will tell, and I think it's kind of like a learning curve, and some people are just way behind the curve. But I was thinking about, like, okay, well, how do we fix this? And I think it also like leads into like supporting indie art and indie film, right? Because you want the accurate, you want someone who is actually having that lived experience to and who cares about the well-being of their characters. Like for some reason, I have writer friends who are queer and not queer, and the way that queer characters like attach them, or queer writers attach themselves to their characters is like, I mean, exponentially more intimate. The way they talk about their characters, like the way that they infuse their own personal anecdotes and context into those characters. So I just think that's beautiful. And I think, you know, like just another point to why we need to be supporting independent queer and POC creators.
Absolutely. Samson, I see you got your hand up.
Yes. Hold on. Okay. Yeah. Oh, shoot. Hold on. There we go. So one of the things that I also wanted to bring up that I think is worth exploring too is the fact that these aren't just issues that exist in the larger, media community, but also in the queer film community, because there are some queer content creators who will contact Black queer actors, and some of the scripts will reinforce racial stereotypes in queer stories as well. For instance, I got a story one time, and it was one of those times I was really looking for work. I was hustling. I was selling chicken dinners. I was doing whatever I could to make me a couple of dollars. And I got this script, so I'm really excited to get it. I'm like, oh my God, work. And I read it, and it's still in my email. One of the first lines was, "Give me that big black cock." And I clicked off of it, and I wrote him back, and I gave him a few choice words. And it really opened my eyes, because a lot of people think that just because we're in the queer community, that a lot of the issues that exist in the larger world don't exist in our community, and they do. One solid example is if you get on dating apps, if you get on Grindr and a white man hits you up and you're not interested, he's gonna tell you how he feel about you and your skin color. And so that translates into the scripts too. So that's something that we should be aware of.
Anybody else want to chime in?
Yeah. So the original question is about queer baiting and like the concept of hinting at queer characters' relationships on screen without explicitly committing to that, right? And I feel like maybe like in the larger container of this conversation, representation, race, sexuality, everything, it is entirely about power and politics. Entirely. Like a great example of this is like the Tulsa massacre. I don't know if y'all have the same IG feeds that I do, but it's like they like burned down Black Wall Street and like all of these like thriving Black communities in Tulsa, and we don't know about it. And why don't we know about it? Because the people who are writing the history books did not want us to know about that, right? The same thing goes with film. And so I feel like the biggest argument that is brought up in the film industry with this is like, we're afraid that something is going to flop, right? So we don't want to have like a queer Black character because I don't know if people are going to be able to relate to that. Like we could just have like Renee Zellweger do it instead, or like Scarlett Johansson. And it's like, it is dangerous to have general audiences identifying with queer characters, identifying with Black characters, because as we've discussed, we all have blind spots, right? I don't know what it's like to be Black. I don't know what it's like to be a woman, to be white, right? And so no one person should have the comprehensive power to tell everyone else's story, because if that happens, what's going to happen is people are going to write screenplays that start off with "Give me that big black cock," right? And like, we're not going to be able to hear from that Black person. And so it's like a great example of this is like, I'm assuming you all have seen 101 Dalmatians, and then they just made Cruella, right? And 101 Dalmatians, she was on one. Oh my gosh. Like, she was like, just like trying to get that fur coat. And then at the end, she literally drove off of a road and her eyes were just yellow spirals. Like, she was cray, right? But what y'all didn't know is that someone killed her mom, and that person owned Dalmatians, right? And that there's like a trigger there, there's trauma there, right? And so that extra context is crucial, right? And that extra context is humanizing. That extra context is absent for people like us. And so we are flattened to these like plot devices, right? And the same thing goes with like queer baiting. It's like entirely political, that I feel like there's like so much fear and panic around the idea that like, I do Drag Queen Story Hour, which is like, I'm a drag queen and I read children's stories to kids, right? And the religious right loves to eat that up. They're just like, oh, you're trying to like molest these kids, you're trying to like indoctrinate them and like turn everyone gay. And like, we all know that's not how that works, right? But like, there's so much of a fear of these kids identifying with queerness that their solution is to censor altogether. They're just like, you just can't be around them. We're just going to cut off your story. It's just erasure. That is our solution. And so it's like, I feel like the reason queer baiting happens is because they want to be able to check a box. They want queer money. They want our money, right? And so they want us to watch it. And at the same time, they don't want to alienate like the general population who might not agree with our lifestyle or whatever. And so it's like, you can't have both, you know? Like, we want to be humanized and we want to pay for content that humanizes us. And at the same time, like, it is long past due for creators to take a stance and to suffer the consequences of that. Like, for anybody who is wondering if Black stories or Asian stories need to be told, it's like, look at Black Panther. That was bananas at the box office. There were little kids who I was teaching who were like wearing Black Panther shirts, like of all colors, right? Who were identifying with that and were just like, I want to go to Wakanda. It's like, don't we all? Like, Crazy Rich Asians, that was huge, like launched Aquafina like to a new level. You know what I mean? This is not about money. This is about like the psychology of relating to and identifying with any other experience except for like cis white maleness. And they know that. They know how dangerous it is. And because it is so dangerous, it is also so fucking powerful. And that is where we creators come in, because our voices are needed and are necessary. And don't you ever mistake for a second that the lack of diverse media is the same thing as a lack for a desire for diverse media, because we are hungry for it. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else that hasn't spoken to this? Yeah, you good? Okay. Wow. Okay, so this next question is about what's going on behind the scenes. So not what the viewers are seeing at home, but what we're experiencing behind the camera. Do you believe that the representation that we're seeing on screen is equally portrayed behind the scenes within the film and TV industry? And do you think that the industry do you think the way that the industry runs behind the scenes fully supports you?
So I know we talked in the question, it's phrased as like, you know, do you believe that representation off screen reflects the representation on screen? And so we basically identified that the representation on screen is not great. So I guess, yes, it does reflect, but is it good? No. And, you know, like I said, there are folks in the industry who do go out of their way to try to make sets comfortable and accessible, and who are kind and compassionate people. Yes, those people exist. But there are a lot of people who are not like that. And I think in the fast pace of the, you know, the television industry, in particular, television and commercial, no one cares necessarily to take the time to get to know you, to get to know who you are. Things are buzzing back and forth, like you're put in your trailer or your room or holding whatever, and you know, like the first people you meet are like the makeup artists, the wardrobe stylists. So like recently I did a commercial and it was in San Francisco, and the directions like to get there were like confusing enough. So I finally get there and I'm like, oh my God, am I in the right place? I think I spot the producer. No one's saying anything to me. Like I'm like walking on set, like I, you know, and for me, like my defense mechanism is I'm always gonna look confident and look what like I know what I'm doing, even if I don't. So I'm just like walking, like parading the streets of San Francisco, and like I walk up to someone and I was like, hey, is this the so and so shoot? And they're like, oh yeah, are you Bianca? And I'm like, yeah. And like this one guy's pretty nice. So he's like, okay, yeah, the trailer's over here. So he brings me to the trailer. No one else says a word. Like people are just like looking, but no one says a word. I go get in the trailer. I'm sitting there waiting for the makeup artist. Like no one said, again, like people come in and out of the trailer. No one says anything. Finally, the makeup artist comes in. She's really sweet, really nice. But we're kind of like secluded off to the side. No one really like interacts with us. And then I get to the back of the trailer where the wardrobe stylist was. And so she was really nice. And then she kind of like, she was the person that showed me the most warmth, I think, like, and she like showed me around the set. She like told me kind of like what was going on. And after that, like people slowly started interacting with me, but there were times where I would like be off to the side and like literally, I'm the only Black person here. I failed to mention that. I'm the only Black person in this vicinity. I'm the only Black actor, and then everyone else is white. There's like maybe 1 or 2 Asian people working behind the scenes. So that was just a really awkward experience, and it wasn't the worst experience I've ever had, but by any means, but it was recent and it was just uncomfortable. And what I think happened was they thought that I was intimidating, because I've been told before by a lot of white folks that I come off as intimidating, that I'm an intimidating person. Now, as you can see, I'm like a total goofball. I get my words mixed up like every other sentence. I'm not an intimidating person, but it's just weird because like they saw a confident Black woman and they didn't know how to interact with me. And I think that's due in part to how, you know, these types of interactions and relationships are portrayed on screen. Like you can be a confident person, but you don't have to be a bitch. You know what I mean? You don't have to be mean. You don't have to be cruel. You don't have to be intimidating. And I think that's just I think a trope that I noticed with Black women on television. So I'm like, okay, well, clearly they don't work with a lot of Black folks. So it just made for the whole situation to like be uncomfortable. Now, conversely, when I went on my first day on set to Chosen Fam, completely different. I mean, things were buzzing, it's an indie set, so it was like extra busy. But the first scene we had was like at a music venue. So it was like a really cool, like little like DIY, like little spot in, you know, some back alleyway in San Francisco. And I knew nobody, but I saw people of different shades, of different colors, of different presentations. Instantaneously, I felt more at ease. Like just implicitly, just looking around, like the stark feeling between like seeing all those white people on the set in San Francisco and just seeing like this sea of diversity on set of Chosen Fam just put me in a better headspace. And I know that has nothing to like, no one can control, you know, their skin color, who they are. And I'm not saying the problem was the whiteness, but it was just how I felt, because I've been in uncomfortable positions because of my race, right? So like, and I think like the conversations on set of Chosen Fam, they opened up easier because everyone was less intimidated, because everyone had met people like each other before. So it was just a wonderful experience. You guys have to watch Chosen Fam when it comes out. I'm just so excited for it. But I just want to work on more projects like that. And the only way we can is by like community support and crowdfunding. So make sure y'all, if you have queer creator friends or POC creator friends, support their work, amplify it. If you can't donate, share their campaign, give it visibility. We need more visibility. That is just the main thing. We have the smarts, we have the creativity, we need the resources, and that comes by being seen. Once we are seen as marketable, right? I hate that term, but like, let's be real to business. But once we are seen as marketable because we are seen, we can do amazing things. So sorry, tangent.
Yeah, absolutely. Support, 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 and definitely check out Chosen Fam. I'm so excited. It's gonna be amazing. Alrighty, anyone else feel called to speak to that question?
Yeah. Oh, I just wanted a time check too. I know we were at 7:30. Is it okay that I go?
Yeah, I mean, I have, what time are we set? We are set. Oh, I see. We're gonna have to do a part 2, Bianca. Holy, we're gonna have to do a part 2 of this panel. There's been so many amazing things said. Absolutely, go for it, Kyle.
Thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you, Bianca. I'm so glad you felt that way. Like, it's music to my ears. I'll keep it short. I'm not an actor, like, officially, so I haven't been on set and I can't speak to that except for like my own sets. But I also wanted to dive deeper into like tokenization and like what it might mean to have representation and not in a meaningful way necessarily. Like, I'm assuming a lot of us are queer here. I don't know if that's like an appropriate read or not, but like we all know what it's like to look at LinkedIn or like online and like everyone and their mom is like turning their logos into like rainbows, right? Like Google's doing it, Facebook, everyone, like it's rainbows everywhere, right? And then we all know that like after June, it's gonna disappear. And like they're not necessarily going to be asking for drag queens, not necessarily going to be asking for people like Dom or Leah or Samson or Bianca to speak, right? And it's like very pride specific that this is even happening right now. And like, I feel like that can replicate itself in the film industry as well, like absolutely. Like a good example of that is Kim's Convenience, that Netflix show, which centers on a Korean Canadian family who owns a corner store. Like they had prided themselves on having Korean voices in there, like In's Choi. But after they announced their last season, an actor came out, Simu Liu, and was like, we were treated like shit. And like a lot of our voices were silenced. Like we were there in the room, we were present, but it was like one of us and the rest of them were white. And when we brought something up, it was like summarily dismissed, like our ideas, right? And I also think it's ironic and kind of poetic that the one non-Asian person is getting a spin-off show and everyone else is getting discontinued. And so it kind of brings us back to this idea that we were talking about between Dom and Leah, where we were asking Leah, like, what do you do with these roles that are problematic that you get? And like, do you let the creators know? And it's like, yes, that is an important piece of the puzzle, right? Like letting them know, like, by the way, this is messed up. Like you should look at this differently. But it's also like pointing to a bigger system of things, right? Like there is a whole industry that does not want to lose its specific type of power. And it reminds me of like this MLK quote. I know he's like overquoted and diluted, but like, it was like, he was saying justice or freedom is never like given voluntarily, but it must be demanded, right? And so all of the people who want to see a change are going to be met with resistance. When we go to the writer's room and when we ask for Korean voices, like there's going to be resistance and we need to expect that, right? Like just because we bring the spotlight to injustice doesn't mean it's going to be just like overturned overnight. And so when we think about just like diversity behind the scenes, like this absolutely replicates itself. And going to Bianca's point, this is why it's important to support independent artists, because these people do not have the same sort of monetary ties to it and the same high stakes and the same, like we're not coming from the same world, you know? And so that's why these projects are important. Also, thanks for what you said about Chosen Fam.
Thank you. Just being mindful of time to all the panelists here. How are we doing? I know we said that it was going to be an hour and a half, but already 5 minutes over. Do we have another 10 minutes just to wrap this up? Or
yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you. Just got so sucked into your answers that I just decided that time wasn't a thing. Any Samson or Leah, do you want to chime in with that one?
If I could chime in on that one, just really quickly. I've been on a couple different sets, some that were like commercial where it was like, no one really cared. You may even get a look. Right. You may have to say, for me personally, no makeup, please. I don't wear makeup. This is what I wear. You know, it's like a challenge, right? There are other sets that I've been on, like Chosen Fam, that's just ridiculously amazing, right? It's just everything that's already been said, right? It's super supportive. It's pronouns are on point. It's just a great experience. Now, I was recently on set in LA. It's kind of a big deal. I can't really talk about it because it hasn't aired yet, all that, but it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had. And because it's from top down, it's about being inclusive. From top down, it's about pronouns. From top down, from the writers, like her, it's just, that's what it is, period. And the entire cast, from the actors to makeup to camera, everybody, if someone got a pronoun wrong for me, I would just, like let them know. And they were like trying, you know what I'm saying? Some of them picked it up. The two actors that I was doing the scene with picked it up. Some didn't, and it was jarring when it happened, but it wasn't like vengeful, or it was, folks were trying. So I say that to say that there are some places in the industry that folks are trying. They really want to do that. They really want to be inclusive and for folks to feel welcome. I think it comes from, like, it was just a culture from top, like the writer to everybody. And I think that she did a really great job of, those are the people she wants in the project. So those are the people that are there, right? And it's folks who may not know, but are open to knowing, and may mess it up. Like we always do sometimes, we all mess things up, but are open to being like, I'm gonna try, So that gave me some hope, in the fact that, no, folks are trying. Maybe it's more about education and awareness. How can we talk about, implicit bias and microaggressions and how it lands and how it can be harmful? And I think that folks want to be better, but I just think it's a culture, it's kind of a culture shift. And like, was mentioned earlier, things are happening so fast that it's like, I'm sorry, that's pronouns, but action. You're like, you know what I'm saying? So I think it's a culture change, but I think that there's hope. And this last thing that I experienced a few weeks ago was so much gratitude, a blessing, and gave me a lot of hope for, no, actually, there's progress being made and we can continue to do that. So, yeah.
That's so great to hear.
Yeah. Wow. Gives us hope for the future.
Mhm.
Bit of a
Yes.
breath of fresh air. Well, congratulations on your
Thank you.
big project. We look forward to hearing.
I'll let y'all know when it airs.
It out. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's clear that, like, through this conversation, we've obviously got a long way to go. What would be your call to action, if we can all keep it relatively succinct so that we can get through everyone? What would be your call to action to creators at this time in the history of media?
For me, it would just be, make your stuff. Go to your community for support, and community, show up. There's, as independent creators, there's very little we have control over, like in the grand scheme of things, but we do have autonomy, right? We do have tenacity. So just go at it, and if you are a friend, if you are part of the community, or if you are an ally, you need to give your community visibility. And the best way to do that is just sharing on social media. Like, finances are one thing, but like visibility is just as important when we're talking about creative endeavors. So just support.
Nice.
I would say to be bold and unapologetic and unrelenting in what you have to say. And if it scares the shit out of you to say it, it probably means you need to say it. You know what I mean? Just say what is true to you. And I know that sounds so cheesy, but it's like, it's easy to fold to the pressures, and it's easy to sanitize or to dilute it to make people comfortable, but don't, because if you're feeling it, then there are others who feel it as well, and we're dying to hear from you.
Beautiful. Samson.
Oh, it's so much to say, but I will summarize it all by saying, don't be afraid to tell the truth. On one hand, I'm happy that as a society, we don't let people get away with being assholes, which is important. You don't have to be an asshole, but at the same time, it's very important for you to call things out and call it like it is. We need people, especially who look like us and people who know better, to tell the truth so we can have a conversation about it. being afraid, sweeping it under the rug isn't going to do anything but complicate it even more and make people more passive aggressive with their biases and their racism and their homophobia and all that other stuff. Hoarding the resources, call it out when you see it. And for the people who know better, lead by example. And for the people who have the tenacity, who have the courage, have the strength, stay motivated, stay inspired. What we do is not easy. You know, I've been doing this now for 2 decades, and sometimes I'm just like, look, why? I want to move to Alabama and get me a man who likes to eat cornbread so I can make him a big old pot of cornbread every night and get a baby and a dog and just be done with it. I am so freaking tired. But I know how important it is for us to do what we do. I believe that we all have purpose, and this is our purpose, and that if we stick to it, no matter how hard or how challenging it may be, we will get everything that we need, and we will tell the stories and do work that will create the links so that our generations will be able to move forward. So that's what it's about, is just really sticking to it, being strong and not being afraid to tell the truth, and having faith in everything we do and each other.
Thank you.
You. And I will just quickly say thank you to everyone. This has been fantastic. Thank you, Dom. You've held this space and this container with such beauty, ease, and just great energy. So thank you for that. I would say make the work, be the only one in the room. And I love what was said before that, you know, like if you have the energy, the endurance, if you have the strength to do the work and be the only one in the room, do that, because that's going to pave the way for others who may not be ready to do that, right? Get yourself a team, people around you who care about what you're doing, who support you. Hell, be on someone's team, okay? Support each other, right? And then the last piece is, you know, support the work, support each other. And when you get there and you are in a position of success and privilege, have some integrity, bring others along. Use that privilege, use that voice to make sure others have the opportunities, right? So it's a practice, and we're in it for the long haul. So let's take care of each other and put the work out there. And it's hard, but we can do it. We can do it. Thank you all.
Well said. Well, we have officially gone 15 minutes over and we do not have time for audience questions. Apologies if you were hoping to ask one of these beautiful humans a question. We'll have to do a part 2 or something because there's so many things to say, clearly. But I just want to close up by just saying such a big thank you to each and every one of you that is here today.
Well, Dawn, not to cut you off, I think we should all get to tell folks how to keep in contact with us so they can see our work.
Idea. 100%. Great idea.
Oh, well, I'll go first. If you're on Instagram, follow me on Instagram at Samson McCormick. It's just my name, at Samson McCormick on Instagram. You know, lots of positive energy, lots of comedy, Black queer representation, really good stuff. And also, if you have Amazon Prime, check out my newest film called Love the One You're With. It's an hour that you'll be happy you spent looking at it.
Nice.
I guess I'll go next. So my Instagram is kid@artofficial, kid@artofficial, quite literally. And for Black X, you can follow us at Black X Film Fest on Instagram. And then our website is bxfilmfest.com. Our festival will be September 17th through the 19th this year. And I mean, make sure to follow us because we do a lot of, you know, interaction with our audience. We have a couple panels planned out and we're going to be doing some in-person events. So yeah, stay tuned.
Nice. Kyle?
Oh, I'll put it in the chat, but my drag name is Panda Dulce, and Chosen Fam Series is my first film that Bianca and Leah I have the pleasure of working with on. Also, I just want to say piggyback off of what Leah said, like when you get up there, bring other people up too, and like Dom, I feel like you're doing that. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you for the reflection. I appreciate it. I'll also make sure to put all of your contact and your Instagram and everything in the caption for the YouTube video, so people will be able to find you through there too.
Oh, yeah, okay. Oh, and I just put mine also in the chat box. It's your boy. This is complicated, y'all. It's YA period BOI period L Robbie 30. So you can also find me Leah Robinson. So thank you.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time today. You're just such incredible minds. The things that have been said here today are so important, and you're such courageous trailblazers within the industry, and it's super inspiring and gives me hope for the future of TV and film. So everyone watching, make sure that you support these beautiful humans and lift them up, amplify, share, spread the word, all that stuff in every way that you possibly can. In Start the Wave news, just before I jump off, just to say that we have just closed our second round of funding, and we're in the process of reviewing those applications, and we're going to be able to support some really awesome grassroots initiatives that are bringing in a new world. So that also is hopeful news, and we need some sometimes, right? So if you haven't heard of us before, make sure you check out startthewave.org, and on Instagram it's start_the_wave. Thank you so much. Happy Pride to everybody. Celebrate yourselves. And that's everything from me. Bianca, do you want to say a couple of closing words? How are you doing over there?
Oh, well, yeah, again, just really privileged to have had this space to talk, and thank you, Dom, for being open to this. I know, so funny how like the last few months have transpired. I just like sent an email to Start the Wave, and like all this stuff started. So
we were like, yeah, that sounds amazing. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, so I'm really grateful, and thank you all for tuning in for this really important conversation. And I looked through the chat, and it seems like we have folks from different backgrounds, so that's really cool. I hope it resonated with you all. And Black X, please support Black X. We are crowdfunding right now for our 2021 festival. So, you know, if you can't donate, that's fine. But if you could share our campaign, that's cool too. And just stay in the loop with us on social media, because we are doing some cool stuff.
Absolutely. All right. Have an amazing evening, everyone. Thanks again. Until next time.
Till next time, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. Thank you for being here.